Now, when it comes to partnerships and collaborations, again, there are different kinds of partnerships and collaborations. We could have partnerships between corporates themselves in addressing the issues that we face in this country. If you just look at the report that's produced annually by Trialogue, it clearly indicates that there's a large amount of money that companies spend, particularly in two areas, in education and health. But if you look at the impact that that spend has in addressing the problems that we have in education or in the provision of health or access to health by our population, you'll certainly find that we are really barely scratching the surface as companies. But we must also recognize that where we have a government that has more than R1 trillion worth of a budget, and us as companies may be spending just less than 10 billion rand, there's no way we can compete with what government is doing. But what we can do is to pilot new ideas, is to innovate, is to work with government in coming up with new concepts, because very often it's very difficult for government to come up with new ideas because they have to look after the interest of the whole population. They have a system that's already in place. There may be changes that are taking place in different departments, especially in areas such as education and health, but it takes a while for government to come up with new concepts and ideas. And as companies, we are very well placed to come up with new concepts and ideas, but we can only effectively work in investments that we're making in CSI if we are able to replicate those ideas that we may be generating through the innovations that we have. And if you look at the partnership between corporates themselves, in a lot of cases, and I'm involved not just with the First Rand Foundation, I'm involved with the Xanax Foundation, which I chair, as well as the Tutuga Bursary Fund and the St. Augustine's College, I have found it extremely difficult to work with other companies when it comes to matters where we may have a common interest. If you just take education as an example, a lot of companies, sometimes because the CSI activities are housed in the corporate affairs or in the HR department, and there's no senior involvement in companies, the people in the corporate affairs department or the HR department have got to justify their existence. So how do they justify their existence? They've got to try and hold on to whatever activities they have so that they can claim, when it comes to performance measurement particularly, or when it comes to bonus time, that they did something, that there's some activities in which they're involved. But also, companies typically compete amongst themselves, and therefore, you need a very different mindset to run CSI for people to understand, for the company itself to understand that it can have a much bigger impact if it was working with other corporates. And typically what I do find is that in cases where CSI activities are housed in an independent trust, or you have independent trustees that are part and parcel of a corporate CSI initiative, you are more likely to have people who come with an independent mindset as opposed to executives who only look at the company and therefore will always have and wear a competitive sort of cap in terms of how they look at CSI. And secondly, what I do find typically works is not just having independent trustees, but also companies taking their CSI activities outside the clutches of executive control and have it managed by an entity, even though executives may be involved, but an entity that is independent. Typically that works much better because you can address the issues without conflating the affairs that the companies may be looking at in generating profit with activities which they get involved in because it is exactly the right thing to do. So, and when it comes to communities, because you still have companies that look at spend in CSI as something that they are doing for the communities as opposed to something they are doing with the communities. There's still a very low level of community engagement in some of the CSI activities that companies are involved in. So clearly, I think as a country, we've got to accept that there's still a lot more that needs to be done in forging true partnerships amongst corporates themselves, between corporates and government, between government entities themselves. Because, I mean, if you just look at government departments as an example, at different levels, from national to provincial to local government, you find a lot of duplication that happens. And in a country that has limited resources, it is tragedy to actually have or see the kind of wastage of resources that we still see.